Welcome. I'm Caitlin Rubin, Interim Curator of Exhibitions at the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. Thank you for joining us for this program. This conversation is presented in conjunction with the exhibition A Female Landscape and the Abstract Gesture. Organized by visiting curator Chassidy Winestock, this show brings together works by 4 artists, Maren Hassinger, Howardina Pindell, Liliana Porter, and Mildred Thompson, who developed innovative abstract languages and vocabularies in the 1960s and 70s. In times of social rupture, they forged their own way through novel artistic gestures. By nailing, folding, unraveling, piercing, and fastening, these artists underscored the labor inherent in their art making, creating works that highlight the body by revealing the actions through which they were crafted. The exhibition is on view in the Johnson Kubikundis Family Gallery at the Harvard Radcliffe Institute in Cambridge through June 22nd, and I encourage you to visit in person. For further information about the gallery location and hours, please visit the Radcliffe website at radcliffe.harvard.edu. The artworks featured in A Female Landscape and the Abstract Gesture emphasize the effort and care in their creation by revealing the ways in which they were made. Or, as artist Mildred Thompson describes, they make the invisible visible. Similarly, the stewardship of collections and archives requires labor and an ethics of care that is often unseen. Today, the exhibition's curator, Chassidy Winestock, is joined in conversation by Melissa Messina of the Mildred Thompson Estate and Holly Smith of the Women's Research and Resource Center at Spelman College. Together, they will speak about the ways that the care of art and art-related materials often intersects with deep care for people, place, and community, fostering connections that can span generations. Towards the end of this conversation, Chassidy will share some images that relate to their dialogue. You can read more about all of today's speakers through the links provided on the events webpage. Before we dive in, I want to extend our thanks to members of the Radcliffe Institute Leadership Society and our annual donors who generously keep Radcliffe programming free and open to the public. We also want to gratefully acknowledge the Johnson Kubikundis Family Endowment Fund for the Arts. Finally, we invite you to submit your questions for today's speakers throughout the program, as we will leave some time to answer these towards the end of our hour together. And now it's my pleasure to invite Melissa Messina, Holly Smith, and Chassidy Winestock to the virtual floor.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. What a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much, Melissa and Holly, for agreeing to join us this afternoon. I have been looking forward to this program since we started planning it so many months ago. I feel as if it's a touchstone in this ongoing project, which is bringing very intentional programming in conversation with the exhibition, A Female Landscape and the Abstract Gesture. And I just can't thank you enough for being here and for what I know is going to be a fantastic conversation. And to that end, I will do just a very brief overview and introduction. And I wanted to begin with a real zooming in on the exhibition and curating work that you have done, Melissa. And that is primarily because I think that there's so much important work that is being done to highlight the work of women of color artists working in abstraction. And in particular, your landmark exhibition, Magnetic Fields, Expanding American Abstraction, 1960s to today, was such an important moment in my research trajectory when I first saw Mildred Thompson's works reproduced, and was really just floored by this artist who I could see was doing all of these amazing, innovative things in that moment, beginning in the mid-1960s, when she started to make her wood pictures. And so I wanted to talk through and I wanted to bring us into this conversation by thinking about that exhibition in particular, but then also so many exhibitions that have been put on at Spelman. This real deep historical legacy that Spelman carries of highlighting the work of women artists from the African diaspora. so many incredible exhibitions have been in those hallowed halls and hallowed galleries. And in particular, for me, bearing witness, of course, but then also all of the exhibitions that have been done around the artists that I feature in A Female Landscape in the Abstract Gesture. Mildred Thompson and Maren Hassinger and Howardina Mendel have all had very important exhibitions that, have been in Spelman's galleries, and have been contextualized in a way that is both very important to the local community, so important to Atlanta and this broader history of HBCUs and the work that's being done out of the Southern region to bring attention to marginalized artists, but also the incredible importance that those exhibitions have had in contextualizing the work of these artists in particular. And so I mentioned that to zoom in and really bring us into focus about the work that's being done on Spelman's campus, and then to segue to what you do, Holly Smith, at the archives and the important work that is being done to preserve the legacy of women from the African diaspora, but in particular, to think about the ways in which maintaining those archives for a variety of different disciplines. And so mine, art history, is something that we often, I think, don't do enough of talking about, focusing on, giving kind of the floor to the work that's being done on that level. So thank you again for being here. And I wanted to go ahead and give the floor to Melissa at this moment to discuss specifically your work in relation to you being an executor of Mildred Thompson's estate, but then also how it's influenced by this deep knowledge that you have as a curator, and all of the important work that you've been doing around that as well.
Thank you, Chassidy, so much for having me. I feel really honored to get to be in conversation with the both of you. And first, I just want to thank Harvard Radcliffe Institute for having us. I think anytime we can give platforms of visibility to marginalized artists, as you said, that's the important work. And so I'm so grateful that we're here to discuss Mildred's work in that way. And I congratulate you on a really beautiful exhibition. So excited for you, for the show, for the book that will live on. So thank you for highlighting Mildred's work in such a profoundly thoughtful and educational way. And Holly, so great to see you. I love that the three of us are in Atlanta, but just in 3 separate spots. But thank you for your kind words too. I did feel that it was really important as we began early on in this project of championing Mildred's work to a broader audience, that it was very important to contextualize it, right? That Mildred was not working in a vacuum. There were women working in abstraction, Black women working in abstraction, before her and as well as after her. So the Magnetic Fields exhibition, co-curated by myself and Erin Judgetts, which traveled to 3 different venues around the country, really did intend to highlight that it was a moment where I think the art world was taking a deeper dive into Black abstraction, but looking predominantly at the male artists. And we thought, well, wait a minute, there were incredible women working alongside them, on par with them, and sometimes in even more interesting ways than some of them, to be quite frank. So we were excited to be able to, again, give them a platform of visibility. And for me and my work with Mildred, having known her for many years, and really wanted to take an opportunity to bring her work into a broader dialogue. I sort of intuitively understood that people weren't perhaps going to take the work as seriously unless they knew that it was part of an art historical narrative.
Thank you so much for that, because I think that particularly when we're talking about this moment that you zoom in on, looking at it kind of a little bit at a distance now. You know, we're starting to think about it in terms of its historical place, right? Like, and I love that one of my mentors, Sarah Lewis, specifically cites your exhibition as this particular moment, this moment that we will look back on and think about the ways in which folks start to really take seriously thinking about abstraction being done by women of color artists, and really being very intentional about recovering that history in that very particular kind of way that many of those artists experienced it. And what I really, as a scholar, an emerging scholar, a person who was relatively new to that field, really took away from the exhibition catalog too, was that there was an intentionality around making sure that we understood that all of those people were also individuals, and that the ways in which they had entered into this broader world of working in abstraction as a person from a marginalized background, that did not necessarily, look the same way, right? Like it required a kind of care and close looking and what we talked about in our earlier conversations, a refusal to fragment the person, to abstract the person, right? And to be very intentional about making sure that we didn't do that, right? That we didn't come to conclusions based on just that broader grouping. And so I think that that's where I'd like to segue into talking to Holly, because again, like as an emerging scholar, as a person who was, really beginning in my field to do that research, I couldn't believe, kind of my luck to go to Spelman's archives and not only, be immersed in, this amazing like wealth of information, but to also have the stewardship of someone like Holly Smith, who I know if there's anybody here today who has worked with Holly, they know what I mean when I say that just having her be a person who is helping you navigate that archival research experience as a relatively new scholar and researcher is an incredibly special experience. And so I want, Holly, for you to talk more about your role as an archivist, and especially as an archivist of the Spelman archives, the ways in which that kind of true care and intentionality around understanding that there are elements that bring us into this grouping, this club, right? But that we want to make sure that we're doing the work to make sure that we're telling the story of these folks as individuals and their individual accomplishments. And, doing that granular work, because I see you as someone who exemplifies like that.
Well, first of all, thank you feels inadequate, Chassidy, to or respond to that. Just very kind and meaningful and genuine reflection. I'll take a page too from Melissa's book to thank our colleagues at Radcliffe for the organization, to everyone here on the conversation, but I especially want to thank you both for the opportunity to be in space and in community and conversation with you, Melissa and Chassidy, just to really be able to learn so much more, not only about the Mildred Thompson's life, but these incredible women artists. But again, Chassidy, you're always so gracious to give everyone their flowers. But in the words of Melissa, you helped to create the garden. And just really want to amplify your incredible, beautiful work that I had the wonderful opportunity to go to Radcliffe and see, and just how important and care and intentional thinking about an exemplar of your practice, not only your archival practice, your curatorial practice, but being rooted in communality, collective communal care and respect and the humanity that unfortunately I feel so many times that Black women, folks of the global majority lose that if we're not outright erased, sometimes there's a dehumanization or depersonalization. So just really want to thank you for that opportunity. And just to speak also a little bit about the significance of this exhibition, A Female Landscape, which is the book that the Spelman Archives loaned for the exhibition and that you so wonderfully gave the title of the exhibit to. I've been at Spelman for 10 years, and to my knowledge, the book has never been exhibited before. So that is a major deal to be able to show this really beautiful artwork, this embodied memory of Mildred, her work and her practice, and have it in conversation with her work and the rest of the work of the incredible women artists, and the deliberateness that you had in having a chair right in front of the sketchbook so people can really have an intimate encounter, that you can sit and be present. And I think that was just a wonderful way to encapsulate kind of the practice that we have here at the Spelman Archives to have intimate and close personal connection with the materials. I mentioned I've been at Spelman 10 years, and it has just really been a joy to be grounded in an archive connected to a women's center founded by Dr. Beverly Guy Sheffield in 1981. And the Women's Center really being the hotbed of radical progressive activity, student activism, but engagement by and about research by and about Black women and Black people. So we've been able to amplify the archives in a way to activate them where we're not just, kind of taking in records objectively and neutrally. And if people want to come use it, that's great. No, just being centered and grounded in a Black feminist space, and to be able to employ the kind of ethics of care, the the replication of what I feel call Black feminist archival practice, and the intentionality and gathering and the communal nature it took to gather these materials, and the way we do like to amplify and activate the archives with wonderful scholars. And when I say scholars, I mean everybody who walks through the door too, right? Those of you doing incredible scholarly work, but anyone with intellectual curiosity coming through the doors. So I think the exhibition and even the title, I love the title Memory Work, because I know we're all engaged in this through through the research, through the curatorial practice and our archival practice. But one reason I really love that word memory work is because it unites us all across discipline, but we're all interested and invested and engaged, whether you're in academia and a community archives, an activist and organizer. The responsibility we have to tell not co-op stories, but to be cooperative, to not replicate misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, sexism, rape, other forms of oppression in our engagement and in our building of community and doing this memory work. So I feel very grateful to be able to do this work with you all, but being grounded in that kind of memory work practice at Spelman has made it so easy to do this type of connection with you all.
May I just add to that too, that in Chassidy's exhibition, all of the works that are on view in the show have not been on view since the 70s. And so they have been part of the estate's collection. And I feel that, I have a privilege that I am the curator, and I mean that in the truest sense of the word, the caretaker, the steward of Mildred's materials. But it's my job to give as much access to other people, to the work, to other people as possible, so that they can forward it and present it and think about it and put it in dialogue. And so it was such a rewarding experience to get the works, that haven't been seen, cleaned, in some cases framed, obviously documented in the book, and that it's up in an educational space. Mildred was at the heart of her practice an educator as well. And so to have it in a space, as Holly pointed out, where there are benches and chairs and places where people can really not just look at the work, but engage with the work and consider it deeply, that's the work. That feels like an extension of my work, and that I'm able to provide that opportunity for other people to get to take this and do all of these beautiful things with it.
I love this because one of the things that both of you are pointing out in your comments is that there's a real enrichment of and layering on, right, of our examination of what we might see as the primary object of an exhibition or going to the archives. But there's that layering on that can be done by pointing out this broader context. And one of the things that I was so excited about with the exhibition was bringing a female landscape to the exhibition, this accordion fold book by Mildred Thompson that was a gift from Mildred to Audre Lorde and was in Spelman's archives in a folder, just like any other correspondence, but it's this encompassing, amazing, bold work of art. And so I love that bringing that work into the exhibition, in the center of the exhibition, and to both of the points that you all are making, which is that it is both an object, a singular object within the exhibition, but it is also being brought into the exhibition as a work that's meant to be interacted with in a very particular kind of way, in a way that is more intimate and more pointedly about recreating the space in which it is usually previewed and seen, right, in the Spelman archives, sitting at a desk, hopefully at least some of the time in communion and in a social setting, right? It's being looked at while folks are in a class, going to the Spelman archives, to, enrich the lecture that they just received. And I love that it can do all of this work in a very subtle way, I hope.
Yeah. Well, and to underscore the point of the importance of archives is that piece, although it was made by Mildred Thompson, it was a gift to Audre Lorde. So it was in Audre Lorde's archives, and so it's amazing to think about the way artist materials are passed on and that the care for them is taken up by other institutions, right? It warms my heart that Holly's been taking such good care of this incredible work of art that's out of my hands, it's out of the estate's hands, it was out of Mildred's hands the minute she sent it to Audre. But the fact that it lives in this other archive, in this other dialogue of correspondence about Audre's life, and that interconnectedness is just, the meat and potatoes of what we get to do.
And Melissa, you make a really great point about that. You both do, Chassidy, as well, about how important it is to see the connections and connectivity across cultural heritage institutions. Like you said, so we have right up the street, really, Mildred Thompson's estate. We have a significant amount of correspondence here. We have the exhibition at Radcliffe, and it makes me think about how important it is that we do activate and amplify these materials outside of our walls, and so people can have an opportunity to engage, like at the exhibition, or to come to the house, Mildred's house, for yoga. That was amazing. I can't wait till I can come. But really to see the connection and connectivity across the people, these women's lives and the lives that we're honored to help document, because sometimes I think, even people we love and respect, they can be flattened to, and not understanding, recognizing their humanity, people's layers, how people can be brilliant and complex and problematic and all these things. And I think that to be able to engage in a rich discourse, particularly thinking about Mildred's work. And I really, again, credit the two of you all with helping open my eyes to the artistic practice. Chassidy, I think I remember when you came, looking at the construction of the accordion book, well, even where did she get this material? I've never seen the materials like that. And the book itself is not very large, but the way it folds out, it just helps to, think of it beyond as object, artifact, but archive. And I want to take a minute to really shout out and recognize the Spelman Museum of Fine Art, which has incredible exhibitions by and about Black women artists, but when Beverly Buchanan had a show here, there were items and materials from her archives to complement her work. So it just allowed for this rich, broad way where you can encounter the art, the artist, and some of the context. But then as you, as the viewer, the listener, you're able to bring yourself and your experiences in it that lend your own ideas and thoughts and interpretations that can broaden the conversation. So just thinking, just being very grateful to Sister Mildred, Sister Audre Lorde, and everyone else who has entrusted us as the memory workers with these materials to be able to be stewards of, but to help amplify and activate. And I know that the three of us have, talked so much about how we care about doing that in community with each other, but in community broadly. And I think that that is one of the most beautiful things and beautiful parts that we can do that with these incredible works.
And I think this is such a great point, right? The layering, the unfolding that can be done when you work collaboratively in that kind of way. Like you have that intention of making those points, like implicitly and explicitly, right? But one of the other things that I was thinking about as you were talking, and that I have as something I definitely wanted to talk about this afternoon, is how archives, how folks like donate their archives, or how those materials get to the archives. And specifically, I really appreciate the work that you've done to make sure that people understand that that's a lot about relationships, right? And so while I really want to hear you talk about that, I also want to talk, I'd love to hear Melissa also talk about building the kinds of relationships that it takes to maintain an estate, right? All of the work that goes into that, kind of intangible thing that goes on that results in us being able to access these materials and to preserve these materials.
Did you want me to start with that? I wasn't
Yes,
sure.
please. Absolutely.
Well, just to also say, while we're giving shout outs to institutions, it is Emory University that holds the official archives. Mildred Thompson papers are at Emory. And that was certainly through relationship building here in Atlanta. There was an archivist and librarian there that was very interested in developing their collection of African-American archives, and Mildred was one such person. And so it's been interesting now that I am the steward of her home, and that we have been renovating the home and looking through materials of both her and her partner who lived here. They bought the house in 1988 in Grant Park in Atlanta, thinking about what belongs here, the home as the archive, the space that people are visiting here, how they're interpreting the materials when they are here, what researchers want access to when they're here. We have, as Chassidy knows, a very extensive inventory of works on paper. But as I said, as we've renovated, we've been finding a lot of ephemera, photographs, historical documents. And that's really the next phase of this, or one of the many phases of this project, to think about, well, what belongs at Emory as part of her official papers, and what belongs to the house, as archive, because it's challenging. I never would want a researcher, and Emory's about 20 minutes from here. And so it's not as if it's a different city or a different, country, but it's always been told to me that you can do an artist a disservice if the material is kind of spread too far afield, because you're asking a lot of a researcher to go to kind of several different places. So again, it's trying to really think curatorially, art historically, academically, about what makes sense to keep in the house and what makes sense for, to exist in compilation at Emory as well.
And thank you, Melissa. I think you really did, just a great job in highlighting one of the other, I think, barriers that can exist in our cultural heritage profession is access.
Right.
And the idea that Emory or even Spelman might not be too physically far, but what are the barriers to access if people, again, are just have intellectual curiosity, want to engage with the works of Mildred Thompson, Audre Lorde. And so I think that's, again, where I really appreciate the work that you both have done and that our other wonderful colleagues and people that care about those things continue to do to make sure we get beyond the walls of the physical institutions we are to be able to do outreach and advocacy and community building, whether it's at community archives, community centers, events just outside beyond the doors, and to talk to people about how they can access materials or to bring, again, I think about exhibitions, digital exhibitions, just in other spaces, or just being able to go beyond the physical doors of our own institutions, which can be physical, barriers, based on people's experiences, race, class, all the things that can be a barrier. And just because, I'm a Black woman at an historically Black college, I don't want to replicate those systems of erasure and oppression that impact us all, So with that being said, talking again about, like you said, relationships, one of the main questions that we'll also often get is, well, Audre Lorde didn't attend Spelman or teach at Spelman. Why do you all have her papers? And because we are connected to the Women's Center, in addition to being the official repository for Spelman College, we also document Black women and Black people in areas of social justice, Black feminist theory, human rights, LGBTQIA advocacy, performing arts. And it really came because of Audre Lorde's relationship with Dr. Janetta B. Cole, the first Black woman president of Spelman, iconic, also president of Bennett, iconic Black feminist educator and cultural worker. And it came because Dr. Cole, when she became president in 1987, she invited Audre Lorde back to Spelman in 1988. Audre Lorde came to campus in 1977. Certainly, I believe, is the first out Black lesbian on an HBCU campus, and had a very challenging, might be a charitable way to put it, experience. So when Dr. Cole invited Audre Lorde back in 88, she was close friends with Audre Lorde and her partner, Dr. Gloria Joseph. And this time around, it was a very different experience because of that friendship, their shared connectivity and advocacy and work as Black feminists, Black intellectuals, Black writers. Audre Lorde then decided to donate her papers here. And in the collection, in Audre Lorde is just a beautiful telegram. Everyone remembers a telegram from Dr. C to Audre Lorde, thanking her for her donation. So it really, again, centers the foundations of the collections here at Spelman to be rooted in a Black feminist practice of access, of accountability, of relationships, and again, making sure to amplify the voices and experiences of Black women and Black people. So we still, and I should say, Spelman, we don't have an acquisitions budget, so we don't pay for collections. So when people are interested in wanting to donate materials, it's for various reasons, or what we're able to tell people, how we're able to support them. So I prefer to think of it as a conversation rather than extraction, or trying to, the used cardsman mentality of trying to get someone to donate, but really to talk ethically and broadly about the implications of donating materials to an archive, whether it's at Spelman or not. But for some people, it's really important to have their materials at a Black institution. So with that being said, I take it as an ethical responsibility of myself that we can be able to maintain the materials safely, but provide access and make sure, again, the students in the Atlanta University Center, and particularly Black students, have an opportunity to help to work with these materials and make them accessible. That was very important to a donor at another predominantly white institution I worked at. She wanted to make sure Black students worked with the collections and had access. So say that to say, we take on, people are donating materials out of, generosity, out of a desire not only for the preservation of their legacy, but to make it accessible. So I see that as a major, responsibility on my part to make sure I can do that ethically and as collaboratively as possible.
Holly, I love that. And I'm so glad this topic is coming up too, because it's something I think about a great deal with this home. So Mildred's partner, Donna Jackson, lived in the home until she passed about 2 years ago. And my directive was to make it the Mildred Thompson headquarters, in her words. So that is a very broad definition. We had, a 20-something year relationship together. So I understand what she means when she says that, but I was pleased that she didn't sort of, tie my hands in any way in terms of what that means. And so I've been thinking a great deal about, because this is a very new project and we've been undergoing renovations, and it's been very recent that we have been able to open the home. Who are we partnering with? What other organizations? Am I giving access to artists who are here? And speaking of donation, most of the renovations have been happening through a collector who's also a contractor, and decided that he would be willing to barter some etchings in order to do the work. And so it's been incredible, what types of generosity are coming to the project. People who are returning work to the home, having once, maybe Mildred gave them a piece or something like that. But it really is my responsibility to think deeply about who has access to the house and how to do so safely and responsibly, but how to do so ethically, and how to make sure that there are as few barriers as possible. And so as we're thinking about developing this residency program, what types of access to Mildred's work do people get? You mentioned we've been doing yoga upstairs, right? Like, what does it mean to research? What does it mean to experience Mildred's work, be in her former studio, participating in a yoga practice, right? As opposed to maybe a more kind of what people would think as maybe a more formal research study, right? And so really trying to think in unorthodox ways, because both Mildred and Donna were very unorthodox people. So wanting to really make sure that the spirit of their wishes, the way they utilize the home, is encapsulated in how we do programming going forward. This was a safe space before. I think that was, a ubiquitous word. I always used to call it the island of misfit toys. It was where if you didn't belong, this is where you belonged. And so there was music and poetry reading and food and lively conversation by people of all different backgrounds. And so I really think deeply about how we can replicate that in how we move forward and give access to the house. And again, thinking about, what does research mean? What does experiencing those materials mean? And are there different ways to do that, rather than sit in a chair and document things with your iPhone and be taking notes, right? Like, can you have a more experiential process in that? So
Thank you, Melissa. And if I could, Chassie, just tag on, thank you for the, I just have this visual of this house brimming with conversation and fun and food and activity. And I just love that kind of, I don't even want to say pushback. To me, that really is, it should be what the model is, I think, for cultural heritage institution and spaces that people can live in and inhabit, as opposed to just, kind of go and have the stayed or the expectation that that will be the experience, but that living in humanity and enjoying life and amplifying and bringing your whole authentic self isn't part of it. And what you said actually evokes another, iconic Black woman writer, feminist, and cultural worker, Toni Cade Bambara, who I'm delighted to say Spelman is also honored to have her papers there. And just when I think about the way she used that term cultural worker to describe what she did, and just from, she is the one ancestor that I really wish I could have met in person, because just to hear people talk about her, from people that knew her, in community, just the way that she drew people in. And these are people from all different socioeconomic, political, racial, gender identity backgrounds into her home, into her physical spaces. And I'm reminded of, she wasn't able to teach a class on Black women writers at Spelman. So she had the class at her, which it's a whole other thing, right? But she had the class at her home, and students would gather there at her home. So it just makes me think of how the sites of what this cultural heritage work, this memory work isn't fixed. It's not fixed in physical location, but it's also, I don't believe, should be fixed in structure and format. And that, where, what do they say? When, folks are gathered in someone's name or identity and memory, that becomes the site. And then it can become a site of, like you said, of just an activated, lively, rejuvenating space.
Yeah, I mean, this is just so perfect, and I don't even want to interrupt because it is amazing. And I think what you all are highlighting is that, exactly what I really wanted to get out of this program was that there's all of these spaces, like there are all of these like nodes and, varying ways of like being in community and learning and building on our research questions that we do as researchers, that we continually are allowed into these varying spaces where you get the chance to exercise those like research and questioning like muscles in ways that are so unscripted, right? Like I think that what was so like remarkable for me in my relationships with the both of you was that the extent to which I was coming in a very professional manner, but that immediately there was this real effort on your part to create a space where I felt like I was still comfortable and welcomed and like completely seen for like as a person, right? Like, and not just like a means to an end. And so I think that there's something very like important to like sit with that for a minute and to think about the ways in which it can inform our approach to our research subjects, right? Because I didn't, I never had the chance to meet Mildred, for instance. And so making sure that like her legacy as a person is not something that I further abstract. And I think that can be done on a variety of different levels, but one of the most impactful ways of doing that is to model it. And that's what was so incredibly important about having the opportunity to work with you all, in addition to lots of other incredible people that I've worked with. But it was always this sense of modeling the professionalism along with a real intentionality about being inclusive, and making it a space where the researcher still feels like they are a full person. So, and so I did share my screen for just a few minutes, but we have like about a minute before we're going to open it up to questioners, but I wanted to show some of the before and after of the home that Melissa was referring to. So I'm going to share the screen again now, and then we'll go to questions in just a moment.
I'm just going to add to, as you're putting these photos up, that these are my iPhone documentation shots as this process has been ongoing for a very long time, even prior to Donna's passing, when we were cleaning out materials or bringing work to storage or getting works prepared for exhibition. It really is a privilege to live in a world where we have a computer and a phone in our hand at all times. But I say that to say that really also is part of the archival process as well, because it's been just recently that we've been able to sort of both afford and be ready for professional photographs, because we're at a moment where we want to say, hey, here's how far we've come, but here's how far we still need to go. So we need that documentation in order to give presentations for fundraising opportunities, and to use it for grants, and to, send potential future residents documentation of what the space is and isn't, to see if it's suitable for them. So I say this to say these are all pretty shoddy, just in the moment, whenever I can think about it, trying to take documentation in real time, as the process is moving along.
Well, and I just quickly want to add to that, Melissa and Chassidy, both of you, just thank you for showing those images, because I think, again, Chassidy, thinking about us at the museum opening, and there were just so many students there too. And Melissa, even these pictures, you know, thinking again about the yoga, but engaging in the spaces.
Holly really wants to come for
I
yoga.
really want, and I just love that. I really want to come. And again, it makes me think of the spaces we have here. And I just, again, want to give a shout out to my incredible colleagues in the Women's Center, my wonderful colleague in the archives, Nikki Carr, because I think one of the things, just even today before we got started talking on, on our program today, one of the incredible former students at Spelman, Liz, who's in a PhD program, said she felt so great to come home. And I think, again, just being able to see the students in the spaces, or, you know, anyone who comes in, but I think it particularly has warmed my heart to see these, you know, young students, primarily these young Black women, see themselves in the papers of Audre Lorde, or in these. Somebody was just reading a dear friend, her class just came over from Emory, and they were looking at the letters from Mildred to Audre. So you see the amplification of access, and you see the engagement, you see the community in each of the spaces. And like you said, Melissa, the fact that we're all in Atlanta in different places show how close we are to each other, and how there's this triangulation, or maybe cosmogram even, of connectivity and access, and how important that has been, and how rich and rewarding it has particularly been to see the students particularly get excited and engaged about this type of work. So
yeah, and often I learn as much from the people who are coming, and students that are here and who are responding to her work or her materials, you know, and that was very much Mildred's point of view. She was an educator, but it worked both ways. It was a very reciprocal relationship. If you were curious, if you had seriousness of purpose, she would spend time with you outside of the classroom, and she wanted to know what you were reading and what you were listening to and what instruments you played, and would you come over and jam with her? Like, you know, I mean, it was very much about that. You know, she didn't feel like, oh, I'm older and more experienced, so I have something to teach you. Certainly that was part of it, but she had just as much to learn from others. And so I think about that all the time when I have artists come and look at a piece and they tell me something about it that is inspiring to them or moves their practice forward in a different way. Like, that's the work. It's that reciprocal conversation is the way in which I think, you know, history gets told in a more accurate way.
absolutely. And the importance of intergenerational
Mhm.
conversation. Absolutely.
Thank you all so much. I think at this point, we're going to go ahead and welcome Caitlin back into the conversation, and she's going to help us facilitate the Q&A portion. And I've been paying a little bit of attention while we've been talking, and it looks like we have a lot of great questions. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up to that part of the talk.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chassidy. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Holly. This is a fantastic conversation, and we are excited to open it up to questions from the audience at this time. So if you haven't already submitted your questions, you can do so using the Q&A button that's generally at the bottom of your screen. We just ask that you keep it somewhat concise so we can try to get through as many as we can in our limited time together. And to start us off, we have a couple questions that have come in that go back to this idea of thinking about the ways that your research, your art historical work is rooted or maybe intertwines with more of a personal connection, or as Holly mentioned, this connection to community. And so, Melissa, to begin, I'm curious, or the question coming in, we're curious what it's like to know the artist or the person in life, and then to be entrusted with continuing their legacy after they've passed. Can you speak a little bit about how maybe your perspective or your work has shifted over time, or if there was a particular instance that there was a switch for you?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I'm grateful for it. Mildred was such an incredible force. She was a woman very much ahead of her time, and had this magnetic personality, and she was opinionated and did not suffer fools, and was just like I said, curious and generous at the same time, and just a very she would walk in and suck all the oxygen out of the room. Everyone just wanted to sit at Mildred's feet. And so it's challenging for me to have known her. She was my professor at the Atlanta College of Art in the 90s. And she was my thesis advisor. And then I, followed that poor woman around until sadly she passed away in 2003. And so I did get to develop a personal relationship with her. She was a friend and a mentor. And I forget sometimes that there are other, it's been 20 something, 21 years since she's passed. And so there's plenty of people who are now working with her materials who didn't get the chance to meet her. And I'm very grateful that Chassidy got the chance to meet her partner, Donna Jackson, who was a dynamic woman and individual in her own right. And so, yeah, it's a bit of a challenge, right? Like, here's somebody with this huge personality. Our biographies could not be more different. Obviously, I'm younger, I'm white, I'm straight, I'm all, we don't share a lot of biographical commonalities. So how do I, take responsibility to help others understand who she was? And so I think curatorially, academically, I am constantly trying to use primary source material and use Mildred's voice. So anytime I'm writing or or speaking and can use her language and use her quotes. She was an incredible writer. And so there is material to draw from. So it's not just my personal relationship with her where I might understand how she might have responded to something. As I said, she was quite opinionated. So I'm not usually questioning what she might have done in a particular situation. And then I had, 20 plus years with Donna, her partner, as well. And so, I take that very, very seriously. It is both the biggest honor and privilege of my life to get to champion this work and bring it forward. And, as Chassidy discussed, I really try to keep it as open as possible. If people want access to it and they're going to use it respectfully, then I do not want to create any barriers. I want to open as many doors as possible to get the work as far afield as possible. That's what she would have wanted. That's what Donna directed me to do. And so, yeah, again, it's a big responsibility, but it's also an honor and a privilege and something I will be working for the rest of my life to do. And it is, what I tell anyone who will listen, if this project, if Mildred's legacy dies with me, I will not have done my job. It is about giving access to the next generation and the next generation after that, whether it's a researcher, a writer, an artist, a student of any discipline who is interested in this work. It is my job to give them access to it because that's how her legacy continues. It really has nothing to do with me. I'm really just here to open the door.
Well, thank you, Melissa. I mean, I'm sure that your intimate knowledge of Mildred's life and her community really adds to the richness of those who do come and do have the ability to access her collection, her archives, and her home. And to that end, Chassidy, I wondered if you could provide some perspective from the researchers and how did it impact your exhibition or your research to be able to visit Mildred's home and to be able to get a more personal sense of her life beyond just the art object?
It's a great question because it is something that I think about a lot, considering the fact that I was in Atlanta. I've been in Atlanta most of my life, and I had a career before as a lawyer before I went back to get a PhD in art history. So a very long career as a lawyer, actually, and all of it in Atlanta, and all of it, my everyday life here in this city with its history, with all of the culture here that I experienced as an entirely different person, it seems at times, right? Like I was a practicing attorney for most of it. So coming back as a researcher and really just kind of incredibly serendipitously, because I started researching Mildred's work before I knew that she had lived and died here in Atlanta, that her archives were at Emory. Like all of that happened prior to, like, all of the looking at her artwork happened before I knew that I would be coming to Atlanta to do that research. And so I think that one of the things about, I think, having that very specific experience that kind of shapes the way that I think about the research is, again, like I've said many times before, I always, as a researcher, focus on the art object first. Like, and I spend so much time with it, doing close reading and doing close looking. And this is something that I think was kind of imprinted on me very early on in this art historical journey by reading the work of Jennifer Roberts, who's in my department too, about close looking, and really staying with the object in front of me first before I ask other questions. And so to have that journey of doing that kind of close looking and then discovering that Mildred and I share this city, right, for a time. Like, I mean, I know Atlanta very, very well. And so thinking about doing that research in Grant Park, in that house, with all of the history that this city has, like it is in a very broad sense, like something that I don't ever want to lose sight of. And I think that's something that I also wanted folks to take away from this program in particular, which is that there is something that is sometimes like, there's this sense that we should be kind of like distanced, or that in order to be objective, like you have to feel this sort of distance from the subject. But I remember having a great conversation with one of my other mentors in the department one time, and they were suggesting that I lean into kind of like my own biography in explaining to people, even maybe in my dissertation, right? Like how I came to this research, especially considering the fact that Mildred Thompson is from Jacksonville, my mom is from Jacksonville, my grandmother was from Jacksonville, my great auntie is from Jacksonville, and I have all of these like strong connections to these women. Like, yeah, it's such a fruitful place to like ground people and to give them that context, that like the different ways that I'm exploring this subject matter as a full person. But I love that I can always go back to the fact that what I said, right? I started with the object, right? I mean, in some respects, like I certainly knew that Mildred was a Black woman, and I, knew like kind of a very bare minimum of her biography when I first started looking at the work. But I also genuinely did start with like just questions about this thing in front of me. And I think that there's something about that story that I can communicate to folks that I think is helpful sometimes. Like I definitely love telling people that story, that there's all of these like ways of making these like, very personal connections, right? But that there's there's that dichotomy, there's that thing that you're always contending with, that balance. So thank you for that question.
Thank you, Chassidy. Yeah, it's certainly beautiful how research can develop. And there are so many questions that I'd love to ask, but I think, we do have to wrap up. So my last question, Holly, this is a really important one from somebody in the audience who's asking about how does one learn to even access archives? And you have all spoken about access. So Holly, quickly, if you can just tell us, how do you use archives? How do you learn about them? How do you get an orientation to them?
Absolutely. No, I think that's a great question. So there's some kind of more, I guess I would say professional, formal information on like the Society of American Archivists, the main professional organization in the US, that'll go through, what are archives, which is helpful and can kind of go through, again, the idea of using archives and the difference between archives and libraries and definitions. But I also think one of the things that I feel particularly most passionate about is breaking down some of those ideas about using archives or donating or doing, how do people preserve things. So I would also recommend looking at the wonderful resources of a group out of Chicago called the Blackivists. Several friends and colleagues that have done extensive, and there are a consortia of Black archivists in Chicago that have done a lot of work with different communities, arts organizations, and there's some primers about community archives and access, and also things to help when you're, be mindful of when you're documenting materials. And I have the privilege of being part of a collective here called the Atlanta Black Archives Alliance, where we all work with primarily Black collections in the city. And we've done some workshops around preserving materials or accessing archives. So I would not just self-promotion, but recommend, please feel free to reach out to me directly. You can find me, my contact information is on the site, and I'm happy to share the links to the Blacklist Society of American Archivists, as well as the Atlanta Black Archives. We don't have any virtual resources at the moment, but that is something we're thinking, creating some kind of how-tos about not only doing research, but if you're thinking of preserving your materials. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. We are unfortunately out of time, but I really want to thank Melissa, Holly, and Chassidy for their thoughtful conversation, and our audience for all of the terrific questions. Registration to visit A Female Landscape and the Abstract Gesture in the Johnson Kouakundis Family Gallery at the Harvard Radcliffe Institute is open, and it can be accessed through the Radcliffe website, radcliffe.harvard.edu. The exhibition is free and open to the public Monday through Friday, 12 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. from now through June 22nd, 2024. Advanced registration is encouraged before visiting. Finally, today's program has been recorded and will be posted in about a week. For information about upcoming Radcliffe programs and exhibitions, and to see videos of past events, including a number related to this exhibition, please visit radcliffe.harvard.edu. Thank you again for joining us, and take care.